Hello, I'm Hương Lan Vũ. I'm the online producer for the World Bank in Vietnam. A few days ago, we asked you to submit questions about urbanization, and we have received a lot of interesting questions from all over the world. With us today is Dean Sierra, the World Bank's urban specialist. Thank you very much for joining us today, Dean.
Thank you.
The first question comes from China. Urbanization in developing countries tends to be simple replication of intensive constructions and change in land use. No long-term planning and building essential infrastructure. Do you have any ideas about making the right choices during very rapid urbanization?
This is a very good question. One of the things that we've noticed and we recommend throughout the world is that during periods of rapid urbanization, although governments need to focus on many aspects of planning, two areas are most critical in our view. One is ensuring that there's mobility for labor force and for consumers, and also ensuring that land and housing markets remain affordable. So in that regard, we would advise that governments need to place most of its focus on providing the large-scale, metropolitan-wide infrastructure, while leaving most of the housing and tertiary-level infrastructure provision to the private sector, because we don't know at what point in time where the most demand will be for housing and land services. So focusing on mobility, focusing on affordability of land and housing should be the key priorities for planners in rapid urbanizing cities.
And a question from Vietnam, Lê Hùng Vọng. What are the major challenges and benefits caused by urbanizations to Vietnam, especially big cities like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City?
Well, Vietnam, like most countries that experience urbanization, are also experiencing at the same time a strong economic growth. And then we see that here in Vietnam. So urbanization helps to push economic growth. That creates economic opportunity. It creates jobs for both skilled and unskilled workers. And we have also seen that the urbanization process has helped Vietnam to reduce its overall poverty rate remarkably over the last 15 years. But of course there are challenges that remain with urbanization, particularly in the large cities. This ranges from needing to revise the way planning is done so that it's more participatory and uses more modern planning principles, but also addressing issues that are emerging like congestion due to traffic and a lack of transit infrastructure, and other environmental sanitation such as drainage, wastewater, and water supply. Addressing these issues and ensuring affordability, because we're seeing housing becoming out of the reach of many citizens in Vietnam, will be another main challenge for Vietnam going forward.
Julius Olujimi in Nigeria says that urbanization is inevitable in sub-Saharan Africa, but he is concerned that even if they have the best urban planners, policies and programs, there could be no significant results without good governance. He asks, what is the way out of the mess created by bad governance?
Again, it's a very good question, and we completely agree that planning is simply not enough. Governments need to focus on good governance. And of course, there are many tools that cities can employ to improve governance. Much of this revolves around increasing transparency, for example, over how budgets are made, where resources are placed, and also ensuring participation in the overall urban planning and urban management process. Great tools such as citizen report cards, things like participatory budgeting, which we find throughout countries like Brazil, and also putting in place programs that are really focused on the urban poor, such as urban upgrading, slum upgrading types of programs, are all things that can help improve the governance aspects of urban development.
From the Philippines, Isaac Espina says that relocating the urban poor can cause a strain on the environment. And he asks, how can the World Bank and governments balance the needs of the urban poor with ensuring protection of the environment?
I think that this question is also a good question. We also have to ensure that we don't blame the poor for the environmental problems that we find in cities. We're all responsible for ensuring that these problems are addressed, and we shouldn't place these problems on the backs of the urban poor. On the contrary, we need to have policies that benefit the urban poor, and in that regard the World Bank is trying to work with governments throughout the world, including in the Philippines, in programs such as slum upgrading, where we try to work with governments to improve the living conditions of squatter settlements or informal settlements and integrate these poor families into the overall urbanization process so that they too can benefit from urbanization.
The last question comes from Japan. Urbanization often results in population increase, which leads to increasing needs for healthcare services. And it seems that it could not meet the demand. What are the strategies for urbanized areas to solve this problem, both in short-term and long-term period?
Well, obviously planners need to account for the demand that will be placed for urban services when doing their planning. This is a basic principle of urban planning. But more importantly, I think we need to look at ensuring that even in rural areas, particularly in rural areas or small urban areas, that basic services are provided. One of the reasons people sometimes leave rural areas for cities is in pursuit of basic services, health, education, water supply, etc. These services should be provided in rural areas so that people are not migrating for lack of services, but they're migrating to cities for economic opportunity. So we need to look at the issue of basic service provision, not just at the city level, but countrywide.
Thank you very much, Dean. We still have a lot of interesting questions, and Dean will answer them in a blog post next week. Thank you very much for watching the World Bank Live chat.